1966. A young mother, Patricia Weir, known to everyone as Trish, is going about her daily chores. Meanwhile, the Supreme Court is preparing to make a public announcement, which is a rare occurrence, making it a historic event. Chief Justice Earl Warren understands the public outcry that is likely to follow. Trish hears on TV about the Miranda Rule, a new law stating that a suspect must be informed of their rights during an arrest. This brings Trish back in her memories to 3 years earlier, March 2, 1963. Trish's mother, Zila, is proud of her daughter who works hard to pay for her secretarial courses. Zila also instructs her daughter, saying that successful men like women who always smile. Trish is working part-time as an usher at a movie theater to earn money. The girl believes that a bright future awaits her. James Valenti, also a theater employee, is in love with Trish and suggests they take the bus together after work. Trish happily agrees. On the way, the young people, both looking shy, discuss movies and books. James invites Trish to visit a bookstore next Saturday and go for a walk afterward. A happy Trish gets off at her stop, but returns home later than usual and looking disheveled. Her sister, Anne, immediately notices that something is wrong. Trish cries, unable to utter a word. The commotion wakes their mother. Trish cries without stopping, and they take her to the emergency room. Anne is there to be with her sister. On her way home, Trish was attacked by a man who committed an inappropriate act. The doctor examines Trish, but his conclusion is inconclusive. Trish whispers that the man had a knife. The doctor takes all the necessary samples, and strokes crying Trish's head. In the morning, the girls return home. Paul, Anne's husband, also returns, and tells the family that a man forced Trish into his car and abducted her. Zila blames Trish, saying this wouldn't have happened if she hadn't been spending time with that loose girl, referring to Trish's co-worker. Now Zila is determined to do everything to save her daughter's reputation. Trish cannot believe her mother refuses to report the incident to the police. Zila tells Trish she's not the first this has happened to. The world is cruel, and if it comes out that Trish is damaged goods, no successful man will ever want her. Zila suggests her daughter forget everything and return to their original plans. Trish feels betrayed. However, Anne insists that they all go to the police together, because the man who did this to Trish could do the same to someone else. How many more girls might suffer? Detective Cooley invites all three women for questioning. Zila makes it clear she's against this conversation, but urges her sister to tell the truth. Detective Cooley shows remarkable patience, while Zila keeps interrupting. Trish recounts how she was heading home when a man forced her into his car and drove off. It was just after midnight. Detective Cooley asks Trish to recall details. She says the man took her to a deserted area. It was too dark for her to remember his face well. When it was over, the man brought her back to the same place where he had picked her up. When the detective suggests a polygraph test, Zila claims the police never believe victims. But Trish agrees to take the polygraph anyway. Zila is only concerned that her daughter's future will be ruined, while Anne believes Trish is doing the right thing. The girl struggles to identify the car. The polygraph results are inconclusive, but this is not the first case of such attacks in the city. Zila drives Trish home, repeating that the police won't believe her anyway. Anne has 2 children, a boy and a girl. Anne supports Trish in every way, understanding what she has been through. Detective Cooley and Sergeant Nealis begin an investigation. The detective believes Trish's testimony, while the sergeant is skeptical. The officers question theater employees and bus passengers, but no one saw anything suspicious. The police have no leads. Anne brings Trish to the police station again so she can add to her statement. But Trish is too shy, so she can't call certain things by their names. A week later, Trish decides to return to work, and Anne gives her a ride. Trish doesn't want to dwell on this story, thinking about her future instead. She finds out that today is James's last day at work because he got a job at a bookstore. Trish approaches him to say hello, but he ignores her, just like Zila said he would. That same evening, Paul notices a suspicious car near their house and memorizes the license plate. Later, Paul meets Trish after work. Now the police at least have a lead. The car belongs to Twyla Hoffman. The officers go to the address, but it turns out the Hoffmans don't live there. According to their neighbor, the last people who lived there were the Mirandas, who moved out recently. The officers manage to find out that Ernesto Miranda has had previous run-ins with the law. One of Miranda's former colleagues gives the officers his new address, and they head there immediately. The car matches Paul's description. The door is opened by Ernesto's girlfriend, Twyla Hoffman, holding a baby in her arms. Ernesto comes out of the house carrying their older daughter. The officers insist that he come with them to the station for questioning. Ernesto agrees. The officers don't reveal to Ernesto the real reason for their interest, lying that his car was seen near the location of a burglary. Detective Cooley plays the role of the good cop, gradually leading Ernesto to the incident involving the girl on 7th Avenue. Ernesto denies everything. The detective shows Ernesto his file, which is far from clean. Years ago, he was dishonorably discharged from the army for peeping. Detective Cooley suggests that Trish identify Ernesto, that way they can be sure it was him. At the police station, Trish meets a girl named Barbara who is presumably another one of Ernesto's victims. Barbara is invited for the lineup first. When it's Trish's turn, she points to Ernesto out of 4 men, but she's not sure. If Trish could hear his voice, she might be certain. Detective Cooley urges Ernesto to be honest. Ernesto claims that Trish willingly got into his car. When he sees Trish, his face clearly shows that he recognizes her. Barbara withdraws her statement because she's engaged and getting married in 3 months. Ernesto already regrets agreeing to the lineup. June 3, 1963, the day of the trial. Trish is very nervous, but Anne is there to support her. The outcome of the trial will decide whether Ernesto goes to prison or Trish is accused of slander. Trish's lawyer, Lawrence Turoff, and Ernesto's lawyer, Alvin Moore, will each represent their clients. 11 months later, it's Trish's wedding day. Zila is very happy to be marrying off her daughter to a successful man. But Trish never told her future husband what happened, and her name never appeared in the newspapers. Trish and Charles Shumway are now officially husband and wife. It was the perfect wedding. July 15, 1965. Lawyer John Flynn opens the folder containing Ernesto Miranda's case. 2 years earlier, Trish testified in court that Ernesto was guilty, but Alvin Moore insisted the victim's words were unconvincing, since it was dark and she could have misidentified her attacker. Nevertheless, the court found Ernesto guilty. Alvin Moore is disappointed with the outcome, convinced that Ernesto, who only completed the 8th grade, confessed under police pressure. Ernesto didn't even know his rights and now awaits his final sentence in prison. In the present, John Flynn, after reviewing all the case materials, calls it a travesty of justice. There is no compelling evidence against Ernesto. He made a mistake by confessing, as the police pressured him, saying they couldn't help unless he said what they wanted. Now Ernesto faces up to 40 years in prison. Alvin regrets that he can no longer help. He plans to retire and take care of his sick wife. Ernesto feels abandoned. Everyone has left him, even Twyla, who took the kids and left. Trish is haunted by nightmares. Charles senses that something is bothering his wife, but she doesn't want to talk about it. John Flynn visits Ernesto in prison, offering to be his lawyer because it's clear his rights were violated. Ernesto has already been in prison for 2 years, but he still has a long sentence ahead of him. John Flynn intends to file an appeal with the Supreme Court, and the Human Rights Union will cover all expenses. Ernesto says the police intimidated him into signing the confession. And if there's a chance now to fight for his freedom, Ernesto can't afford to miss it. Pregnant Trish is taken to the hospital. When he learns it's a girl, Charles feels disappointed, as he had really wanted a son. Trish immerses herself in daily routines, but her quiet life is disrupted by a newspaper article about the reconsideration of the Miranda case. Trish's name hasn't been mentioned in the press, and Lawrence Turoff reassures both Trish and Anne that even if the Supreme Court agrees to a retrial, Ernesto has no chance of being released. All this time Trish still hasn't had the courage to tell Charles everything. John Flynn is determined, even though Lawrence Turoff tries to dissuade him, insisting that Ernesto is clearly guilty. However, John knows that Ernesto's rights were violated and is ready to fight to the end. Just because Ernesto had trouble with the law in the past doesn't mean he's guilty now. Trish had hoped that nightmare was behind her, but here she is again reliving all those terrible events. John's intention to reopen the Miranda case causes a stir, and on February 28, 1966, the court hearing begins. John Flynn argues that the defendant's confession cannot be considered solid evidence. On June 13, Chief Justice Earl Warren brings the very foundation of American criminal law to the table. Since the police forced Ernesto to write a confession under pressure without informing him of his right to remain silent, the court's decision is annulled and will be reviewed. Naturally, everyone is concerned about what's happening, especially Detective Cooley and Sergeant Nealis, who may be accused of abusing their authority. Trish closely follows the developments of the Miranda case on television, which irritates her husband. He's convinced it has nothing to do with her. Detective Cooley's colleagues joke about whether he remembers to read suspects their rights. Twyla Hoffman shows up at the police station. She has returned to her first husband and is worried that Ernesto might be released from prison. She now claims that during a prison visit, Ernesto told her that what he's accused of really did happen. Lawrence Turoff tries to convince Trish to appear in court, but she's afraid of her husband's reaction. Besides, she knows for sure that Ernesto is guilty. Their neighbor tells Charles that a man came by, and Trish is forced to tell her husband everything. He reacts angrily. He doesn't want their relatives and friends gossiping that his wife had anything to do with some Mexican. Trish is determined to testify in court, and Charles calls her disgusting before storming out in a rage. That same night, he's pulled over for drunk driving. Detective Cooley and Prosecutor Turoff offer Charles a deal. They won't press charges if he agrees to look through a folder of photos of recent female victims. Only one of them, Trish, had the courage to put the criminal behind bars. She's a hero, no less. The detective and prosecutor promise Charles that his wife's name will not appear in the papers. Lawrence Turoff still hopes to convince John Flynn to back off, but John doesn't like to lose. When persuasion doesn't work, Turoff adds Ernesto's ex-girlfriend to the witness list, which enrages Flynn. February 15, 1967. The retrial of the Miranda case. Trish is accompanied by her mother and sister. Zila worries that Trish's intention to testify will destroy her marriage, but Trish is determined to see it through and asks her mother to go home. Still, Zila shows up in court to support her daughter. The hearing is declared open. Judge Wren reminds the journalist not to mention the plaintiff's name in the press and warns the jury not to watch or read any news. The first witness is called, Patricia Weir, who recounts how Ernesto Miranda abducted her. As she speaks, she cannot hold back her emotions. John Flynn challenges the victim's statement, arguing that she could not have missed the tattoo on the assailant's body, even though she never mentioned it during her initial statement or while helping to create a sketch of the suspect. Trish says it was too dark. The next witness is Detective Cooley. The judge agrees with John Flynn's argument that the police exceeded their authority by not informing Ernesto of his rights and by tricking him into giving a confession. When Lawrence Turoff calls the next witness, Twyla Hoffman, John Flynn objects, but the judge overrules him. By law, spouses are not required to testify against each other, but Ernesto and Twyla were never officially married. She states that Ernesto confessed the crime to her during one of her visits to the prison. Twyla says she didn't come forward earlier because she was afraid. John Flynn points out Twyla's fraudulent actions with her tax return. In tears, she explains that after Ernesto's arrest, she was left jobless with 3 children. Twyla also claims that Ernesto was a bad husband and father, caring only about himself. The judge calls a recess. John Turoff tells Trish how strong she is and thanks Charles for coming to support his wife despite everything. It's very difficult for Charles. John Flynn directly asks Ernesto what he told Twyla during her visit to the prison. Ernesto confirms that he confessed the crime to Twyla. Nevertheless, John has no choice but to continue defending Ernesto in court. The hearing resumes, and Trish is once again called as a witness. When Lawrence Turoff shows her a photograph of Twyla's car, she confirms that it's the same vehicle. When Turoff asks Trish about her feelings on the night of the attack, Flynn fiercely objects, saying that it's irrelevant and that Trish's emotions have no bearing on the case. Heated arguments erupt, and at that moment Trish sinks into memories of those horrific events. Suddenly Trish screams that she thought she was going to die that night, and the courtroom falls silent. After deliberation, the jury is ready to deliver the verdict, finding Ernesto Miranda guilty on all counts. The judge tells Ernesto that he was granted every possible privilege, one of the best attorneys, free of charge, and a review of the case in the Supreme Court, but his victim received no such privileges and is forced to live with the consequences of his actions for the rest of her life. Thus the judge sentences Ernesto to 20 years in prison. For Trish's family, hearing this is an immense relief. The session is declared closed. Unexpectedly, Trish publicly forgives Ernesto. The news reports that after a retrial, the court upheld Miranda's conviction. Trish feels she did the right thing. 8 years later, Ernesto is released on parole, and the first thing he does is visit John Flynn. Ernesto intends to sue the state of Arizona for mistreatment by prison guards, but Flynn refuses to help. Soon after, in a bar, Ernesto gets into a drunken fight in which he loses his life. Such a meaningless end for him. The irony is that the man who took Ernesto's life invoked his Miranda rights and was not detained on the night of the crime. He fled to Mexico. When Trish finds out, she experiences conflicting emotions. Then a voiceover tells us about the real people behind the story. Patricia were divorced Charles Shumway in 1982. She is now doing well, surrounded by children and grandchildren. Lawrence Turoff went on to have a major career in the Maricopa County Prosecutor's Office. Alvin Moore was the one who initiated the Miranda right. He died at the age of 91. John Flynn remained Arizona's most sought-after attorney and passed away suddenly at the age of 55. Detective Cooley was promoted to captain and retired in 1978. The law granting detainees the right to remain silent and request an attorney has been adopted in more than 100 countries.